Welcome back to session number 4. In today's part of this session, let us get to know the previous part of the requirements which we have studied in the third part of the class, where you can able to see that the stones which are being utilized for the construction purpose has various sorts of requirements. Okay. In addition to that, stones cannot be directly utilized for the construction purpose even after the seasoning also. Why? What is the reason? The reason is the stone has to be carved out to render like a uniform surface. Like how we are going to see the brick, or in the case of the concrete blocks or maybe even the hollow blocks, they have a regular geometric shape as well as the sizes. But here in the case of the stones, wherever you are going to see, they have to be carved out. Means the type of the dressing means the aesthetic appearance need to be given. Then only the structure as well as the function, whatever it is being utilized either for a masonry work purpose or maybe for building of a fort or even for the temples or maybe any of the stone architecture. Therefore, all the types of the finishes are essential. And when the stones are being extracted or carved out from the bed of the rock surface, they need to be given a proper dimensions or a shape. That is what we are going to call it as a dressing of stones. Okay. So, the terminology of the dressing of the stones we have understood. Okay. The next step is, what is the purpose of the dressing of the stones? Purpose of the dressing of the stones, there are 3 various sorts of the perspective that you need to understand. Purpose of dressing means obviously heavy load vehicles are to be utilized for the stones to carry out. Okay. They also have additional weight if they are not being carved or cut into a proper manner. In that regards, the load will be increased and the cost of transportation is also to be increased. For that particular purpose, you need to make a cutout for the stones in a proper manner, and that we call it as a dressing. Therefore, first purpose of a dressing is to give an aesthetic appearance. Second thing is to reduce the unwanted or any sorts of an irregular portion of the stone structure which gives an additional weight, so therefore it will be difficult to carry on. Okay. Third important thing it is to give a training among the localite people who are in need of the job or the work, their concern, so that when the training is being given to them, they are cut into, means the stones. Stones are cut into the required sizes as well as the shapes after the seasoning part. Okay. That is the another sort of the purpose which we utilize it for the dressing of the stones. Meanwhile, the advantage is the predominant part of the construction where it is being utilized, it can be easily carried out. The transportation to be become much more easier, and whatever the stones they are going to utilize, it has to be feasible and economical also. That is the purpose of the stones. Now, coming on to the types or the varieties of the finishes that you are going to look upon in the surroundings, whether you see a paved surface or like a footpath, or maybe as a roof covering material, or if it is being utilized as a dam, or maybe such as like a filter material and its byproducts and all. For all these things, you need to have certain finishes. Okay. That kind of the finishing is required. What are those? Let us get to list the type of the finishes, and then I am going to explain one by one. Okay. Now, the forms of the finishes, we have the acid type of the finish, posted or grooved type of the finish. Next, we also have a circular finish, and then chiseled rotted finish, punched finish, next dragged or combed finished, then we also have a furrow type of finish, next we also have a molded finish, polished type of finish, and in addition to that we also have other sorts. There it is being given as a reticulated or maybe the vermiculated, okay. And the major purpose is whatever the irregular size or the shapes or the lumps portion of the stones, when it is being cut off, it gives an aesthetic part of an appearances. There is a one thing. We have the polished and we have also the molded type of the finish. Later on we also come across reticulated or the hammered type of the finish. We call it as a hammered rust finished, okay. Then reticulated, vermiculated type of finish, tooled type of finish, therefore we also come across the rubbed type of the finished, the last one that we are going to carry on, it is the quarry faced finish. Quarry faced finish. So to list on there, you can also go for classifying further words, but let us get to know what is meant by acid type of the finish. First one it is. Excuse me. The acid type of the finish, the term as it represents, the ags are being completely used and the draught is being made, the curvature is being made. That portion kind of the finishing is what we call it as a carved, or maybe we call it as a acid type of the finishing, where the heavy loaded ags is being utilized to break the stones and to give the particular sorts of an effect, okay, that we call it as acid type of the finish. Next, boasted or grooved type of the finish. The boasted or the grooved type of the finish here, in this thing, it can be a rectangular, maybe a non-continuous parallel lines, either it may be a horizontal markings or maybe a vertical, horizontal or maybe vertical or maybe even in an inclined portion. The non-continuous parallel lines are being drafted on the stones. This kind of the finishing is what we call it as a grooved or a boasted type of finishing. Next, moving on to the next type, that is we call it as circular type of the finish. Circular type is a special cases where it may be a spherical in nature or maybe a flattened portion of the stone is to be made in a circular manner. Usually, in a usual manner, it is being utilized for the milling of the cereals or maybe for the millets also. In an olden days, people were used to have the hand milling or the grinding portion. There you can see the circular type of the finish. Okay. Next thing, chiseled rotted type of the finish. What they are going to come across. In the chisel draughted type of the finish, you can see the chisel portion is used and it is being kept on the surface of the stones. With the aid of the hammer, a sharp blow is being given. The reticulations are being made and they are being like a pointed type of the finishes, pointed or maybe lines. The markings are being made. That kind of the draughtmanship made by the worker, we call it as a chisel draughted type of the finish. So we have finished. Next, what is meant by a punched type of the finish? Yes, especially in the case of the punched type of the finish, there is a requirement in which we come across the formation of hollow holes, okay, the hollow portions or the sinks are being made, hollow sinks are being made. We call it as a small portion of an depression. Okay, these are being made and hence what we call it as a punches that is being made. That kind of the finishing is what we call it as the punched type of the finish. Next, dragged or combed type of finish. Dragged or combed type of finish, it represents where a steel portion of the comb is taken, okay, the teeth of the like hair comb that you are going to utilize it, a plastic in nature. Whereas for the rock you need to use a steel completely in nature. The teeth are also being steel, sharp edges, okay, heavy in nature. They are being carved out in a fashion like a curved in nature. This kind of the draggings that has been made, we call it as a dragged or maybe the combed type of the finishing. It can be done literally maybe a horizontal or maybe any sort of in variations, that we call it as a dragged or a combed type of the finish. Okay. Moving on to the furrow type of the finish. This is another special case where the 20 mm has been sunk on the outer surface. Here you can see the continuous parallel curve lines is being marked away. This we are going to call it as in a row pattern, we call it as a furrow. And that kind of the finish is what we call it as a furrow type of the finish, where this portion is, the width is 20 mm and this will be 15 mm, the upward portion, this particular portions will be, okay. That particular sort of the finish is what we call it as a furrowed type of finish. Next, moving on to the next part, it is molded type of the finish. What is meant by a mold? If you wanted to get into the desirable geometrical shape as well as the sizes, not only a flat, spherical or whatever the shape or the sizes, maybe a machine can be utilized or maybe a hand tool can be utilized. So therefore, that kind of the finishing, we call it as a molded type of the finishing. It can be used either through the machines or in a manual manner, okay, by hand. We call it as a hand finish and machine finish. So tools are being used to provide a molded portion, okay, whichever the abrasion is being made or any other structures which is being not required is cut into the part. Normally this you can see in the case of the pavements, okay, and even for the compound walls also they have been utilized, and especially in the case of whatever the temples or maybe any of the churches, whatever the monumental material you take, the molded finish is required for the purpose, okay. Best example is Hoysaleshwara temples and all, built by them, Hoysalas, okay. There you can see the high monolithic type of the rocks or the stones structures is being kept and carved out. That is what we call it as an architectural beauty, okay. So molded finish we have come across. Next thing it is polished type of the finish. Polishing means stone surface has to be made soft, especially for the flooring purpose. If in your homes and all you go for using the granites or maybe the marbles or any other sorts of the stones, if you are going to use it, the surface has to be made smooth in nature to avoid any high frictions and all. That particular usages where the neat finishing is being given, the polishing machine is being utilized, that kind of the finish we call it as a polished type of the finish. Next, hammered finish, okay, or hammer dress finish, where a large hammer is being utilized and the chisel is also utilized sometimes, or maybe normal hammer is also utilized. This completely a rectangular portion is being obtained and then the type of the finishing is being obtained through the usage of the hammer. Such kind of the finishing is utilized for the construction purpose. We call it as a hammer type of the finishing. Next, we also have a reticulated type of the finish. Reticulated means a net-like structure or appearances. If you see here, the outer portion of 20 mm wide, how we have seen in the case of the furrowed type of the finish, it has been sunk, and here some portions of the net-like structures that you are going to see, like how you see the case of the basketball, in that cases you have a net-like structure, isn't it? Same way here also the depression will be made in the form of a net-like structures. That kind of the finishing is what we call it as reticulated finish, where it has been applicable especially for the joining of the two stones, or maybe especially to carry out a weight which is being laid in a one row or a one layer above the another. That kind of the finishing is being necessary. Okay. Next, you have the tooled type of the finish. Okay. What is meant by a tooled type of finish? Where a continuous parallel horizontal lines are being drawn. That kind of the finishing on the stone surface, we call it as a tooled type of the finish. Next, vermiculated type of the finish. Vermiculated type of the finish, it represents the worm-eaten appearance. Okay, reticulated means it is a net-like an appearance. Vermiculated means where you can see this finishing is being done by using some of the stones where the resemblance of something the worm has eaten. If when you are going to see for the plants which is being eaten by the worms or maybe the insects, okay, the left out portion is what we call it as a worm. Okay, that part we call it as a vermiculated type of an finish. Next, we have a rubbed finish. Rubbed finish means using any of the stone to make another stone to get polished, or hard stone with a soft stone to get polished. Like that, heavy stone with respect to the lower stone to get polished. Like that, we go for using it. That kind of the finish, we call it as a rubbed type of the finish. Next thing, we have quarry-faced type of the finish, or self-faced type of the finish. Quarry-faced or maybe the self-faced type of the finish means whenever the rock or the stones are being extracted from the quarrying process, they do not need any type of an extra fittings or extra cuttings. That kind of the finish can be utilized directly for the consumption or not for, especially for the construction purpose, and that kind of the finishing is what we call it as a quarry phased type of the finishing. So totally you have come across to study axid finish, boasted, circular finish, dragged or combed type of the finish, chiseled, draughted, punched type of the finish is also present. Okay, punched type of the finish, it may also have some part of the articulations in it. Vermiculate, furrow type of the finishing, reticulated, tooled, molded, whichever the size or the shape has been required, hammered, dressed using the hammers and all, especially in the case of the making of the coarse aggregate or maybe for the usage of the rubble stone masonry. There the hammered, dressed kind of the rocks or the stones are being utilized for it. Okay. So this is regarding the types of the finishes normally carried out. With this you have an advantages, the load will be reduced, economic concerns, ease of the transportation, the people will also get job and getting trained for this, and the remaining portion of the cut part of the stones is again reutilized for any other sorts of the purpose, even for the payments or maybe like a filler type of materials in the stone masonry. Okay. So this is related to the dressing of the stones. Now let us get to know, when we have studied in the last class the causes of the deterioration of the stones, as well as in this class you have studied what are the different types of the dressing. Now another question arises, is there any sorts of making stone to be much more durable by adding some of the preservatives or any other materials? Is it possible or not? The answer is yes, it is possible. Let us get to know the preservation condition of the stones. We call it as preservation of the stones. What does the term preservation it refers to? To protect the stone from deleterious effects caused by either the natural, atmospheric or the weathering agency, or chemically or through the biological means. That kind of the protection to be laid against the external as well as the internal agencies, hence we call it as a preservation of the stones. To increase the durability life of the stone masonry, we require that. Otherwise what happens? If you utilize it, completely cracks and breaks and leave the spots or the cleavages, and that kind of the stones can never be utilized for heavy sorts of an construction purpose. Okay, let us get to know the preservation of the stones and what are the preservation methods that has been made for the stones. Let us get to know one by one. Okay, let us move on to the preservation of the stones. Before going to the preservation methods or any other things, what does actually the preservative to be used? Okay, preservatives. Material to be used as a preservative. First thing it is, you should be always having a longer life run. Okay, long run, that is the one criteria of the condition. The reason is it does not allow the moisture to penetrate. So it does not allow moisture to penetrate. It should not impart any color. Should not impart any color for it. And next thing it is, it should be economical for application. Economical for application. Should not fade away. okay, should not fade away. That is the ideal condition. Another thing it is, it should not change the characteristics of the stones. Okay. In addition to that also, it should be non-corrosive in nature as well as non-corrosive should be remain effective even after exposure also. These are the ideal conditions for the preservatives to be used. Now let us come to know what are the different types of the preservatives they are utilized. Okay, that is a one major aspects. So in that, the preservatives which are normally utilized, or the methods, or what we call it as adopted or commonly applied in that cases, they are preservatives adopted commonly, common preservatives. What are those? First one, we have a coal tar. Next, we also have a linseed oil. We have solution of alum and soap. Use of a naphtha or a paraffin. Solution of barium. These are the common preservatives utilized for the preservation of the stones. Now let us take one by one. What does the coal tar? Obviously, coal is a product that is obtained. It is also a fossil fuel. The tar which is obtained is a liquid in nature, and when it is being utilized above the surface of the stone, what happens? It tends to dry quickly. It does not allow the moisture to get penetrated, and it does not have the corrosiveness, but it alters the coloration or the original color of the stones, because it turns into black in color, completely black in color. So therefore, when it is black in color, is it aesthetic for appearance to take it on? So that is the primary concern. Therefore, the usage has been limited because bitumen content is there, and people will be exposed to the volatile organic compounds. Hence, it will be used only for a small scale purpose, not for the large scale. Meanwhile, if you take in the case of an linseed type of the oil, either it is a raw or maybe the boiled linseed portion. It is applied or coated over the surface for a longer period of the time. When it dries up, it develops a color which is dark in nature. Okay, and that particular usage is what we going to call it as the color changes. Okay, and meanwhile, during the raining and all, over a certain period of the time, it has to be utilized again and again, and it has to be utilized at least once in a year on a regular interval basis. That is what we call it as a linseed oil usages. It has certain restrictions. Okay, and it makes the surface stone dark in nature. Next, we have solution of alum and soap. This solution of alum and soap is one of the economical method also, and more easily you can go for adopting it. But the thing it is, they have to be dissolved in a liter of water, 0.5 to 0.75 normality of the sodium hydroxide or maybe the alumina is being taken, okay, in the proportion, especially the soap solution as well as the alum, both of them, okay, they are being taken 0.75 and 0.5 normality in nature, and finally what happens, the solution of the alum and soap proved to be very much economical in nature. Next, paraffin wax. It is a byproduct obtained in the fractional distillation process. The wax which is being obtained as a part of an petroleum product is being applied there itself only, stays for a longer period of the time, but cost is also one of the concern. The reason is the original color of the stone changes. Only thing is that, but it can be utilized for a longer run period. Solution of the bariata, where the barium solution is utilized, we call it as a barium hydroxide solution, BaOH twice. If at all, if some of the constituent, especially in the case of the stone surface, when the barium is applied, the calcium sulfate content, it reacts with the barium hydroxide, leading to the formation of calcium with respect to the hydroxide, leads to form calcium hydroxide plus barium sulfate. This chemical displacement reaction takes place when the solution of the bariata is used as a preservative. Another important thing I forgot to tell, the normal thing, whichever the finishing process is completed in the construction, we go for the painting. So therefore, obviously, paints are also utilized for the preservation of the stones, where a color coating will be done gradually. Therefore, it mainly protects it from the moisture penetration as well as from the atmospheric or chemical impurities. So it is to be applied through the aids of the pressure if deep penetration is to be required for the complete preservation of the stones. Hence, we come across the usage of the common preservatives, except the coal tar and all, linseed, solution of alum soap, paraffin, we call it as a naphtha, okay. Solution of bariata, the barium solution, and paints, they are utilized for the preservation of the stones. Therefore, in totally stone, you have studied how the stones have been obtained from the rocks. Finally, you have come across what are the requirements of the stone, what are the causes for the deterioration of the stone, and what is meant by dressing of the stones, how the deterioration can be prevented by using the common preservatives for the large scale purpose. So, in the next part of the class, I am going to take you to the another topic, that is the sort of the construction utilized for low cost as well as medium cost type of the buildings. It is the bricks. Okay. So in the next class, still then, remember all the concepts and keep on interacting with respect to the external surroundings observation. For a civil engineer, that is a must, and therefore if you have any sorts of the doubts, we can get cleared during any of the live interaction section. Okay. Thank you one and all.